أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا بني إسرائيل اذكروا نعمتي التي أنعمت عليكم وأني فضلتكم على العالمين واتقوا يوما لا تجزي نفس عن نفس شيئا ولا يقبل منها عدل ولا تنفعها شفاعة ولا هم ينصرون وإذ ابتلى إبراهيم ربه بكلمات فأتمهن قال إني جاعلك للناس إماما قال ومن ذريتي قال لا ينال عهد الظالمين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي فالحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ثم أما بعد. Once again everyone, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We begin today with the final ayah or the final two ayat on the narrative of the Israelites, 122 and 123. That's where the entire discussion on Banu Israel concludes. Ya Bani Israel adhkuru ni'mati allati an'amtu alaykum wa anni faddaltukum ala al-alamin. So, sons of Israel, make mention of the favor that I showered upon you and that I had given you preference over all nations and all peoples of the world. This is an ayah that completely, just absolutely mimics ayah number 47 of the same surah. This is actually of the 19 passages that the Israelites' discourse is made up of, that I've delineated and defined and organized in a previous session. This is number 19. That number 19 is just these two ayat, the concluding discussion. And this is actually, in a sense, taking us back to the first passage. Of these 19 passages, the first passages also began, Ya Bani Israel, adhkuru ni'mati allati an'amtu alaykum wa awfu bi'ahdi, ufi bi'ahdikum wa iyaya farhabun. That's where it began, okay? Now that first passage, it was really interesting in that it began and ended with the same call. Ya Bani Israel, Ya Bani Israel. That's how it began and ended. And the summary of that first passage was they were being called, their crime was being summarized as, and this is specifically the Jews of Medina, first of all they're being told, be grateful for the favors that were done to you in the past, and how you were given more favors than anybody else. وَأَنِّي فَضَّلْتُكُمْ عَلَى الْعَالَمِينَ I give you preference over all other nations, not just in that Allah gave them prophets and messengers, but Allah did them more favors than He did any other nation in history. So first they're made aware of their history. The second thing that they're being told is to accept this final revelation. Quran. وَآمِنُوا بِمَا أَنزَلْتُ مُصَدِّقًا لِمَا مَعَكُمْ. And of all the people that should be accepting this revelation, they should be the first, and ironically they shouldn't be the first to disbelieve in it. وَلَا تَكُونُوا أَوَّلَ كَافِرٍ بِهِ. Then they're called out on their current state of affairs, which is, you people, you are experts in the religion. You're the people that know the Torah and the scripture, the Hebrew Bible, more than anybody else. And it's kind of a closed society. Not everybody in the Jewish community knows what's the content of the Torah. It's the experts, the scholars, like we have in our tradition, the mufassirun and the fuqaha, those kinds of people. They know what's in the text. And so you're in a very easy position to disguise the right thing with the wrong thing. Like tell people what you want to tell them and not actually what's in the book. So he says, وَلَا تَلْبِسُوا الْحَقَّ بِالْبَاطِلِ وَتَكْتُمُوا الْحَقَّ. Don't disguise truth with falsehood and thereby hide the truth. And so in saying that specifically to the religious leadership, what's being highlighted is they're in a position to interpret the religion and manipulate people any way they see fit. And Allah is calling them to fight against that tendency. And so that entire passage, in summary, that first passage, is simply calling them to do one thing. First of all, acknowledge that a lot of favors have been done to them, and now it's time for them to truly show gratitude by accepting the final revelation and leave their corrupt practices behind. This is a call more than anybody else. I know it says, Ya Bani Israel, sons of Israel, all of them. But as you study the crimes particularly, there's primary audience and secondary audience. The primary audience is in fact the rabbis of the Israelites. And then the secondary audiences are the congregations who blindly follow them. Okay. Now what happens here at the end is that by mimicking the same exact ayah and revealing in the order at the end again, we're almost reminded, now I want you to think back to where we started and revisit this question. But it's incredible that now, even though it's the same exact words, it has a different meaning. And that's the first thing I'd like to highlight to you about this ayah. When Allah says, make mention of the favors I've done to you, had He mentioned any favors before? No. This is the first thing He said to them, make mention of the favors I've done to you. And then came the list, I rescued you from the Pharaoh and the cloud and the rock that gave out springs and all of it, right? And so first, what favor? What do you mean favor? And then there's a list of favors. By the end of it all, when he says, Israelites make mention of the favor, they already know which favor. Why? Because it's all been listed. But question is, where has it been listed? In the Quran. It's so amazing that the Israelites are being told the only way to mention my favor to you is to actually become reciters of Quran. It's so beautiful that they're being called to the Quran in this way. This phrase even, "Udhkuru ni'mati allati an'amtu alaykum," is actually iqra'ul Quran to them now. Let's read the Quran, study the Quran. The other beautiful thing here to note is the use of the word ni'mah, the singular. Udhkuru ni'mati, mention my favor, one that I showered you with. Well, one favor, there was a list of like 1,000 favors. There's so many favors. Why is he saying one favor? You know? And when you take stock of what's been said throughout, the ultimate favor to them is that they, despite all of their misdoings, get to be the audience to the Quran and the Prophet ﷺ. The grand favor of all the favors is that you're in the audience of Allah's final word, even though you violated Allah's word previously. There's so many reasons to disqualify you, but you get to be the generation that hears Allah's word yet again, and I address you one more time. So, of all the favors, and they all apply, because you know the singular in the Arabic language, it can also be used in a sense called ism jins. Ism jins means an entire class or entire category. So for instance, when we say in English, man is unfaithful or something, or man is forgetful, that's not a reference to one man, it's a comment about mankind. But the word man is singular, one person, right? Similarly, the word favor, it can be interpreted as all favors, but it can also have this meaning of a very singular. So it's kind of got that duality in meaning. So in the sense that it's a singular favor, I would argue that the most compelling case is that of the Quran itself and the Prophet's presence before them, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that the same Jibreel that they're enemies to, which was at the center of this passage, is the same Jibreel that's giving them the words through Allah, Ya Bani Israel, adhkuru ni'mati allati an'amtu alaykum. Like, you're enemies to me and I'm giving you the favor of guidance. You be grateful for what's being given to you. And then the other interesting thing here is, and then I had favored you over all other nations. That phrase also, أَنِّي فَضَّلْتُكُمْ عَلَى الْعَالَمِينَ, has a dual meaning. In the beginning, it's a reference to what happened in history. Historically, no nation received what you received. And now, it's as though the past tense here is suggesting, now the favor is done. I used to favor you over all other nations. Like it's done with now. The case is closed. You better get your act together and the case is closed. Something I probably should have highlighted in the very beginning that I'll make mention of now is even the use of Ya Bani Israel as opposed to Ya Yahud, Ya Ahl al-Kitab, people of the book, but instead saying Ya Bani Israel, sons of Israel. Clearly what they're being called on to remember themselves as is their lineage, right? Children of Israel. And Israel's other name, if you don't know, is Yaqub. Yaqub's father is, anyone know? Yaqub's father is Ishaq, and Ishaq's father is Ibrahim, right? Now, on the one hand, revelation was given to the children of Ishaq, and through Ishaq, Yaqub, which is Israel, and through Israel, you get the Banu Israel. On the other side of Abraham's lineage, Ibrahim alayhi salam's lineage, is Ismail. And through Ismail's lineage, you get the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you would think that on the one hand, you have the children of Israel, and on the other hand, you have the children of Ismail. That's the contrast, right? Children of Israel, children of Ismail. That's not the contrast in the Quran. Are the Muslims ever called children of Ismail? No. But interestingly, we are addressed as, your father was Ibrahim. Millata abikum Ibrahim. Like the only prophet that's ever been referred to, not just as a prophet to us, but a father to us, is Ibrahim alayhi salam. Now that's important to understand as far as lineage. Because the Israelites, when Allah calls them, He calls them to remember their father Israel. And when He calls the Muslims, He calls them to remember their father who? Ibrahim. That's the contrast. We're actually, if anything, we're children of Ibrahim. He's our father. That's what the Qur'an's call is. But then it seems like, on the one hand, the grandson was referenced, and on the other hand, the grandfather was referenced. Right? And the Jews are also children of Ibrahim, aren't they? So why just refer them as children of Israel? And we are children of Ismail in a sense, because that's where the lineage begins for the Prophet ﷺ and all of that. But he takes us back to Ibrahim alayhi salam. So what's the benefit in doing that? It's actually, in a sense, to remind us that we have to think of our identity, like identity comes from the father. The Muslims have to think of their identity tied to Ibrahim alayhi salam. Just as the Jews thought of their identity tied to who? Israel. Like that's how they identify themselves. That's their father figure. Just even in your personal life, how much does a father have an effect on a child's personality and their sense of identity, right? Their last name. It's a part of who you, it's an inseparable part of who you are. But if you reflect on that, just that notion, that Ibrahim alayhi salam is in fact our father, then our identity as Muslims is actually shaped very much at its core by his personality. And that's really amazing, because the Israelites were a specific nation, right? They're the lineage of a specific father. But Ibrahim alayhi salam didn't stay in one place. He travels around. And he's not even concerned about one nation. He's just, everywhere he goes, he's taking Allah's message. And then there are prophets that are coming to destroy even the nation of Lut that has nothing to do with Ibrahim. And he's arguing with those angels not to punish the people of Lut. In other words, clearly he is concerned about who? All of humanity. The Israelites were concerned about who? Themselves. Ibrahim, however, was concerned with all of humanity. And we are the children, not of Ismail, but the children of Ibrahim. If we were called children of Ismail, that would actually, in a sense, mean that we are concerned with the Arab peoples. And if once we call ourselves children of Ibrahim, Millata Abikum Ibrahim, we're actually just like Ibrahim alayhi salam, concerned with all of humanity. So the scope, the way we identify ourselves, what we're concerned with, way more broadened. I had given you preference previously over all other nations, but this is going to be different now. So this is the concluding discussion on the Israelites and how it's now wrapping up. But then that's the other beautiful, beautiful thing that I didn't get a chance to highlight before, and I think it's so important in the study of the Quran to like in my studies, there are insights inside of ayat. You realize something as you're studying and you make note of it. Then there are certain principles. And principles are like, in a building, there are pillars that are holding up a building. There are certain principles in the study of the Quran that when you become aware of them, then your study just changes. And this is one of those principles that I'd like to highlight to you. What are the Jews actually in the study of the Quran? Especially these 182 or so ayat. What are they? They're a nation that lost their way after having an elaborate tradition in religion. They had book, they had law, they had fiqh, they had aqidah, they had tafsir, they had it all. They had ulama, they had ijazat, they had the entire system of tradition. That's what they had. But over time it deteriorated and deteriorated and deteriorated, and what was left was some rituals that were empty, and people didn't really know why they were doing what they were doing, and there were fatwas in all different kinds of directions. If I were to give you an analogy to help you visualize that, what Allah gave them was this beautiful building. This Islam was this beautiful building that Allah gave them. And over thousands of years, this building deteriorated, and now it looks like ruins. It's still a structure, but it's hideous, it's ugly, it's got leaks, it's falling apart all over the place. That's what they became. But still, it is a building, and it originally was an amazing thing. It's got historical value. And the heirs of that building, generations later, are being told, this was one of the most amazing buildings of its time. You should restore it. Right? You should restore that building. It deserves it. It's so phenomenal. It was at the heart of the people. Like, imagine if people didn't take care in a nation's capital or something like the Washington Monument or something like that. They didn't take care of it. Then generations later, if they have a revived sense of identity, the first thing they would do is what? Restore that. Like what they do in Europe, right? In France, for example, there are constantly renovations going on of the buildings from Napoleon's time. Like they're constantly renovating them. Why? Because that's their identity. The faith that they were given was their identity. Now, the reason I painted this elaborate picture is to give you one of those pillars that I was referring to in Quranic studies. Like one thing that you have to hold on to. If you have a nation that was a nation of faith, that were given law, that were given revelation, and they lost their way over time, and they just became like empty rituals, and they don't really know what the religion truly is about, and they've deteriorated in all kinds of ways, and they're fighting one another, and they're hating on each other, and that's what they've become. That's what the Israelites had become. And they're dispersed and scattered, and they take some parts out of context, and other parts they completely ignore, etc., etc. Like, this is what they've become. By the way, I'm painting this picture, and I'm hoping you realize it doesn't sound like I'm describing Jews. Right? That's why I'm describing it this way. That's what happened to them. How do you take a people that have so gone down the drain so bad, how do you bring them back? Well, how does the Quran plan to bring the Israelites back? The Quran says, step one, call them by the lineage that gives them a sense of identity. Ya Bani Israel. What would that be to us? What would be our lineage, our heritage that gives us a core sense of identity? What father figure? Yeah. The first thing you got to do is bring you back to who Ibrahim alayhi salam is. If you want to fix the ummah again, you got to go back to Ibrahim alayhi salam. The second thing is اذكروا نعمتي التي أنعمت عليكم. Make mention of the favor I did on you. How did Allah make, the idea of the favor Allah did for them was, of course, they crossed the water with the Pharaoh. He gave them, a cloud in the desert. He gave them manna and salwa. He gave them the springs of water. These are the things He gave them. But how did He describe that to them? He described that to them through the Quran, didn't He? Quran became a list of the favors that were given to them. Guess what? For us, the ultimate, they crossed the water. Our messenger crossed the desert from Makkah to Medina, didn't he? The enemy was after him, just like Pharaoh was after Musa. And they crossed, and then they became a nation that were given law. Musa went, crossed the water, they were in the desert, and then Allah gave them the law. Then the Torah was revealed. Rasulullah crosses the desert, and he gets to Medina, and what does Allah give him? Sharia. Halal and haram. That wasn't revealed in Makkah, that was given to him. So are there parallels here? Yeah. And these parallels are important because that journey and that entire story, the powerful story of the Prophet ﷺ, there's no better place that captures the story of the Prophet ﷺ than the Quran. The Quran is actually the most beautiful seerah text. That's actually what it is. It's the story of the Quran. And the Quran is the story of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet's life is the story of the Quran. They're each other's story. Now what happens is there are some surahs in the Quran that have, if you study them, you're like, is this a commentary about me? Or is this talking about something that happened in the Prophet's life? It's an elaborate description of what happened in Badr. Exhaustive description of exactly what happened in Badr. Exhaustive commentary of what happened in Uhud, for example. A detailed description of what happened in Hudaybiyah. A detailed description of what happened with Banu Qurayza in Surah Al-Hashr. Why? And this is so specific. If the Quran just wants to give you general rules, here's the code of ethics for war. Here's what you must do, here's what you must not do. That you could do that, right? And then that's revealed, and that's what we do. But the Quran is actually commenting on very specific incidents. Very, very specific incidents. Yes, and we study those incidents and then we say, let us drive universals from it. But think about this philosophically for a second. Why not just give us the universals? Why make us go through the incident and then pull out the lessons? Why do we have to go through the incident to begin with? Part of the guidance of a nation that will deteriorate is they have to relive the struggle of their prophet. They have to review the struggle of their prophet. The Jews were made to review the struggle of who? Musa alayhi salam. The struggle of the righteous people among them. Every time you study the Quran from beginning to end, there are parts of it where you have no choice but to review the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What does that do? It actually makes you grateful for the favor you've been given. Because when they made that hijrah, when they did Hudaybiyah, and when they fought Hunayn, and when they did this or that or the other, that's the reason I get to be a Muslim today. It makes me grateful for what I have. The Jews that were being talked to in Medina did not cross the water. They just live in Medina. That happened thousands of years ago. What does He say to them? فَرَقْنَا بِكُمْ الْبَحْرِ. We crossed the water. You crossed the water. We made you cross the water. But that's not you. That's your ancestors. Yeah, but when the way Allah describes history, He makes you feel like you're there. Allah is making you and me feel like we're there in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. That's one of the goals of the Quran. We started looking at the Quran so legalistically that every time we look at an ayah, we say, what's the fatwa that we can derive from this? Or what's the theological principle that we can derive from this? One of its fundamental goals was to actually connect us to that original struggle. And that's guidance. That on its own is guidance. When people start reliving the life of the Prophet ﷺ through the Book of Allah and mentioning the favor that Allah had done on us, now we start mentioning the favor Allah had done on us, then we're going to start becoming restored. This is guidance. By the way, this is a piece of, guidance. Guidance through an appreciation of history. Guidance through history. Like reliving history. Not just knowing history, reliving it. Crying those tears with them. Fearing those fears with them. وَبَلَغَتِ الْقُلُوبُ الْحَنَاجِرَ وَتَظُنُّونَ بِاللَّهِ الظُّنُونَ. Your hearts had reached into your throats and you were thinking all kinds of things. You're reading that about Ahzab and you're like, it's like you're standing there and the armies are approaching and you're terrified. He makes you relive it. Now that's guidance through history, an appreciation of history. And what's the next thing? If you know how they say this, cheesy saying, you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you came from, kind of thing, You can't really understand your future if you don't understand your past. What did Allah do in this two succinct ayat? In one ayah, it's the past. Make mention of the favor I already did to you, the way I preferred you over all other nations. That gives you a sense of history.